So some considerations for reinsurance notices that need to be integrated into your process certainly as a ceding company is to definitely to know the treaty requirements and also facultative if you've got facultative coverage as well. You need to know what the treaty requires for notice, and it sounds like a very simple thing to say, but in practice it's a lot more difficult, as you all know, to actually make that happen. Each treaty has its own requirements for reporting, and those terms really need to be integrated into your practice, so as the claims then develop, you can capture the claims that are triggered by those treaty reporting requirements. And we laid out some of the typical triggers, I guess, for notice. One would be just a dollar threshold for an excess of loss treaty. Of course, quota share would be at $1. And then the 7 deadly sins, as I mentioned earlier, which are, amputation, head injury, the
burns,
seven.
quads,
you can recite them.
Death. I don't know if I couldn't think of all 7.
Yeah, and the challenge with that is that sometimes you might have a finger amputation that is going to be quite different than an arm or some other severity. So, making sure that you're not over-reporting and really driving your reinsurers crazy with notice on every single claim to try to strike that balance of the claims that really do have some potential financial severity as opposed to, something that really is not going to even probably hit the reinsurance. A lot of times we'll see, 50% of retention. That's a very common reporting threshold. The ones that are more troublesome and difficult operationally, I think, are, significant developments or, something that's likely to result in a significant development.
Yeah, right.
Those are more difficult because it requires a very close coordination with your claim organization to make sure that you get the heads up before that claim is, the $5 million claim when your reserves were $50,000 2 weeks earlier. And that just is a communication issue, and obviously if you're setting up your reporting processes, you should have triggers that that the financials will trigger reporting. But it's nice to know as a reinsurer that those claims are coming in before they have that financial trigger, if you think that's the direction the claim is going in.
So all these last several slides really talk about is getting a good notice out the door at the right time, and that it requires the interaction of the claim department for the most part with the ceded claim department. Now, how do you get that? Well, there's a couple different ways. There's online systems which are getting better over time. There could be reserve triggers that go to the ceded people. There can be large loss reports that can be copied to the ceded people, so they make a determination from that. Or some companies have internal meetings with large loss committees where losses are discussed, and it's a good idea, in my opinion, at least a good idea for someone from ceded to just be there, because there may be a claim where the reserve isn't going up yet, but it's a bad one, and that's the kind of thing where they can really get some intelligence and say, okay, this is something reinsurers would like to know about, even though the reserve isn't there yet. I put in this comment of reserved reinsurer is a happy reinsurer. It's kind of corny, and I almost took it out. But but I think it's true. If the reserve is up, what happens is that the reinsurer has now had the opportunity to look at the file, and it's gone up the levels of management to the right level. And that's important. I mean, the underwriter may have concerns. Why is this type? I didn't realize they wrote employment practices liability. Why is that in here? And you get those kind of questions all flushed out before the billing comes in the door. And what can happen too is the reserve goes up late. I know I've heard from reinsurers where the claims person tends to get the blame about why they didn't spot this one. You did an audit there 2 weeks ago and you looked at this claim, or maybe not 2 weeks, but 2 months ago. So they're forced to kind of take sides and say, you didn't get this for me. They're kind of taking the blame on it. Whereas if the reserve is up, you maybe have an advocate at the reinsurance company because they're not left out, hung out to dry with their underwriter. And on the other hand, it works the other way around too. Late notice, late reserving, you have a lot of questions to answer about why did this reserve go up now? Why not 6 months ago? And that's just, the reserve itself. But if you never got a notice out the door, then you have the late notice concerns that you have to address also.
I've observed too that if you have late notice on a handful of claims or in a particular claim area, that it tends to rattle the reinsurer, and they start to think, there must be a bigger problem here. And, then they start to send in more questions. Of course, I'm speaking from the seeding company perspective, but there's just a general uncertainty about the noticing and is this company really giving me all the information? Because really, reinsurers don't like surprises. They don't like to find out, late in the game that a claim really is going to require some explaining to their management or their retros. So I think the notice process, in my opinion, really, the more consistency you can provide to the reinsurers, the fewer questions, and hopefully the quicker the collection process, because everyone's really comfortable then with the entire operation.